Hey, Jeff Fuller with you. Jay Fuller interviews on all platforms YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, including Instagram. And I am so happy to have an old friend, maybe an old rival joining the program. This is Will Voigt. Will, how are you?
Hey Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. If you can see that picture behind me, that's of a high school that actually no longer is running, Cabot, Vermont. Could you talk about what it was like growing up in Cabot?
Um, yeah, I mean it was a typical small town Vermont experience. So I'm sure a lot of people that listen to this interview that can relate to that. It was really the motto "It takes a village" really applied. So everybody knew what you were doing, and everyone was there to lend a helping hand. But then there were some great things too. You couldn't really do anything without everyone's participation. So as a result, I was involved in all kinds of things besides sports. Like drama, for example, because if the athletes didn't do drama, there would be no drama at a school like that. It was a great experience. And, definitely, I think, had I not grown up in that environment, I'm not sure that I would have become a basketball coach, in all honesty.
And I remember one game that we played again, Division 4 basketball, played against you guys in the middle of the winter. I took a shower. When I came outside, my hair froze. And it's just growing up in Vermont. Do you miss the winters of Vermont?
Honestly, no, I don't. uh, no, I mean, it's funny. I grew up obviously in those winters, but I went to college in Los Angeles, and I think that softened me up a whole lot. So there's definitely something to be said for those winters and kind of hunkering down and that Vermont mentality. But I honestly don't miss those coming out of the gym and your hair freezing stories.
No, well, I remember also that you were a really good soccer player. You actually went and played college soccer. Did those sports, uh, were you driven to play the sports, or was it just being a part of a small school? And so, since you started playing, you thought you would continue?
No, I think when it came to basketball and soccer, I naturally gravitated towards it. So now the one thing about the small town aspect is we didn't have a lot of sports to choose from.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
there was no football team or lacrosse team or whatever else. So maybe had there been those sports that could have replaced soccer and basketball, but um, once I started participating, I mean, and that was the other thing too. In our day and age, there weren't all these club
Right.
teams
Right.
for
Right.
5 and 6 year olds, right? You sort of were counting down the days
Yeah.
until fourth grade hit, and you could finally get into some organized sports. So, for me, I think once I finally got to that age and experienced it, like that was a natural passion for me. And that, when I went to college, even though I was playing collegiate soccer, I think that's really kind of what pushed me into the coaching side of basketball was that I missed basketball a lot too.
Now, could you walk us through the Vermont Frost Heaves back in the glory days, back to back ABA championships? When you were approached about coaching the Frost Heaves, I believe you were in Norway shortly before that. What came to mind? Could you believe there's going to be a pro team in the state of Vermont?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's great about talking to you as a Vermonter. You understand that component of it. So yeah, I mean, growing up, you couldn't fathom that there would be a pro team ever in the state of Vermont, and a huge credit to Alex, Alexander Wolf and his wife Vanessa, who made that all happen. But I think also understood the importance uh, of what it meant to the state. And for me, it was, I mean, that was probably more rewarding than any other aspect to be a part of that first pro team, to know like what that meant, and then come back to the odd, come back to these buildings, see all these people that I had been away from for a little while. Is an experience I'll never forget.
Now, did you have a chance to play at the Odd when you were in high school at Cabot?
I did. My senior year, we made it to the Final Four, and just like any other, I think Vermont athlete growing up, it's an experience you'll never forget. So we lost to Twinfield in that game. I could probably give you a play-by-play of everything that happened in that game. But we grow up trying to get there, and to go back as a coach, and especially the championship game that we played there in my first year, and the cowbells and how loud that building got. That's a pretty special memory I think I'll always have.
Now, with the Vermont Frost Thieves, I was always intrigued. I got to meet John Bryant. He's an excellent guy. Really enjoyed him. He actually coached with you, Bakersfield Jam as well. But could you just talk about the process of getting those players? Was it a typical draft that we would think of like the NBA, or was it just kind of a free for all? How did you select those players?
Yeah, no, there was no draft. So everyone was a free agent. We had a budget we were working within, and we, went out and tried to put a team together. So, I kind of laugh, since those days. I've had a few college interviews, and a lot of times, those athletic directors are like, you have no recruiting experience. I'm like, listen, man, we got 15 guys to come to rural Vermont to play for a pro team that had never existed. So I feel like I know how to recruit. But it was really that, I mean, we were working with a tight budget, so we tried to identify players that we felt represented what we were trying to put together as a team, but also more importantly, what we were trying to do in the community. So being the first pro team in the state of Vermont, and just Vermont in general, right? I mean, it's so community driven, and the type of person that lives in the state. We knew that this team needed to reflect that. So we tried as best we could to really vet these guys, and make sure we brought in the right type of people. And I think the results speak for themselves.
Oh, definitely. And I think I'd be remiss if I did not ask, but did you see the handwriting on the wall? Is that what kind of led you away from the Frost Thieves, or was that just a greater opportunity was on the horizon for you?
Um, I mean, minor league basketball is a struggle. Certainly I was aware of the sacrifices that Alex and Vanessa and everyone, I mean, our investors, all the people that are volunteering. And there's a lot of sweat that went into to making that thing go. And so Alex had spoken with me about his intention to step away from it, and I just felt, knowing that probably was a good time for me also to kind of look at the next thing. We won 2 championships in our first 2 years, so it's hard. It's hard for it to really top that. And I knew that there were going to be some hardships moving forward.
Sure.
So kind of all of it, I think, played into that decision.
Now, one question, then we'll get off of the Frost Heaves. But Kerry Lyons has become a good friend of mine, and he said that he had about 5 minutes of burn in a preseason game, or he never got into a real game. Just having Kerry a part of the program, and just having Vermont come out and support you guys, were you kind of awestruck at how fan support really rallied around the Frost Heaves?
Yeah, I mean, that's what made it so great. And Carrie is like the perfect example of that. So, those of you who watched might remember, I mean, he had like his own cheering section, right? And they would, the free Carrie Lion signs, and uh, which, I mean, that just embodies the whole experience. But yeah, I mean, the fan support was amazing. Like I said, I mean, the cowbells and the atmosphere that we had, that's something I'm going to remember forever. And those coaching years are some of my favorites, and probably will remain that way, for the rest of my life.
And you've seen basketball take you around the world, and one opportunity you had was to coach in the Olympics. This is actually a picture of Kobe Bryant, and I wanted just to touch base. Where were you when you heard of his passing?
Yeah, so strangely enough, I was in an airport in Norway about to fly to Dubai.
Hmm.
Um, so I'd just given a 2-day clinic for their basketball federation, and then was going to meet a pro team from the Philippines that was playing in this Dubai tournament. Um, and so I'd kind of been in the gym all day and away from my phone, and then I didn't have a SIM card. So any, all the international listeners can relate to this, but right, I had a phone that wasn't going to work in Norway unless I was on the internet. So I was basically just off the grid. Get to the airport, and all of a sudden, bing, 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 all these messages coming through. So when I finally had a chance to look at my phone, I think like everyone else, I was just floored. I think all of us in the basketball world, of course, felt that deeply. The world as a whole, but I spent a training camp with Kobe. The Lakers were one of our affiliates when I was coaching Bakersfield, and the D League, then what's now the NBA G League. So I'd spent some time around him. But yeah, it was a punch to the gut, like I'm sure everyone else felt.
And I just got to put this up again. You're from Cabot, Vermont, and then you find yourself coaching against Team USA in the last Olympics. Could you just talk about that experience? And do you ever have to pinch yourself and remember the times where you played Division 4 Vermont basketball? Now you're coaching with and against some of the best players in the world.
Yeah, I mean it's been a pretty incredible run. For me, I would like to say that I try not to forget where I come from. You know, Definitely as a small town Vermont kid, sometimes it's hard to see outside of that bubble. And really just a lot of fortunate breaks have allowed me to do that. And hopefully maybe that can be motivation for other kids that aspire to do that. But you know I always remember what my upbringing was like, and we talked about the Frosties and those experiences, and some of the people that you just listed. I mean, they will continue to be a huge part of everything I do. So um, Wayne Lafley, you talked about Nigeria. Wayne came out when we were in Houston, getting ready to play Team USA. Spent some time with our team. For your listeners, Wayne grew
Yeah,
up,
Lone Wolf too.
played at People's Academy, started Lone Wolf Athletics. One of my dear friends, Steve Pratt, my high school coach.
Yeah.
Steve was in China with us for the World Cup with Angola.
Wow.
Yeah, so these connections don't suddenly disappear. Because of these places that the game has taken me.
Now, currently, you are with Angola. Could you just walk our listeners through how did you get to Angola? And honestly, did you even know where it was before you started coaching internationally?
Well, I had coached Nigeria prior to coaching Angola, so I did know where it was. I was familiar with their history. For most people that wouldn't know, they were like the Yankees of African basketball. So
Hmm.
for a long time, they just dominated that scene. And then we're sort of on the tail end of that. They had kind of rode the coattails of a generation of players, and we're on the tail end of that generation. So it's really sort of a rebuild, but the culture of basketball there is unlike anywhere else in Africa. And for me, at this stage of my career, I've never shied away from an adventure. So to me, Angola was the next adventure.
Now, do you have any Americans on that team? How is that team made up?
Well, just like any national team, you have to have a passport for the country you play in. uh, by the age of 16. And so it just depends, different teams have different stories behind them. And with the Nigerian team, there are a lot of Nigerian immigrants to the US because it's an English speaking country.
Sure.
So the majority of our players with Nigeria uh, had spent a lot of their childhoods in the US.
Hmm.
Their parents had moved. Versus Angola, where because it's a Portuguese speaking country, all of our players grew up in Angola. Now, some of them went on and played, I guess maybe 1 or 2 years of high school, played some collegiate basketball in the U.S. But that American influence was much, much smaller with that team.
Yeah. Hey, I just wanted to get to your time with the San Antonio Spurs, Coach Pop. It's kind of funny because people will say, "Oh yeah, Will Voigt, he was an assistant coach with the Spurs," and I was like, "Well, actually, your start was a little bit different. Could you just talk about your start with the Spurs?"
Yeah, sure. I like all these pictures. You've been doing a lot of research.
Try to.
I'm impressed, Jeff. Uh, yeah, I mean, I started with San Antonio. At the time, I was an intern with the Clippers, and this is coming off of the Spurs' first championship. And Pop was a former Division III college basketball coach at the college that I went to, Pomona. And kind of through that connection and a few others, R.C. Buford, who's the general manager of the Spurs, had also worked for the Clippers. And then Mike Budenholzer, who's now the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. Mike had also gone to Pomona,
Hmm.
and so there were different ties that kind of connected me there. But anyway, I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to come. And initially, I was coming really, as a glorified intern to help in the front office, to really work more with RC than with
Well,
Pop. And about 2 weeks before I was set to show up, they were not happy with their video guy,
hmm.
and so they called and asked, "Hey, do you think you could handle that?" And I knew nothing about what it meant to be a video coordinator in the NBA, but I was like, yeah, yeah, sure. So the funny part of that story is that when I arrived, all the players started calling me 2 weeks because that's how long the previous guy had lasted before before he was out of there. So that's how I got my lucky break. Definitely very fortunate to have that opportunity.
And so, talking about the current climate, the COVID-19 quarantine and everything going on, have you ever experienced anything like this? Specifically, the NBA is talking about coming back and having playoffs, but in your opinion, what could happen, what should happen? It's just a weird time to have such a delay and then have people talking about having them come back and even having a champion this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. Oops, sorry. I was just coaching in Germany, and they've just announced they're going to do a 10-team tournament. Um, Now, it remains to be seen if the government will approve that. And the team that I was coaching has decided not to participate. But
Hmm.
a lot of the discussions around that are familiar. I think the biggest thing, people have to understand. Obviously, it's a little different in the NBA because you're dealing with billionaire owners who can afford a little hit to the pocket. But you know, in the case of Germany, these teams needed to generate revenue and also avoid the penalties that they were looking at by not fulfilling TV contracts and sponsorship
Oh, yeah.
contracts, which are based on games played. So there's a big component of that to the NBA as well. Not fulfilling a season, and I don't know the ins and outs of the TV contracts, but that's a lot of money.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
so there's a huge financial incentive behind this. Now, you have to weigh that with the risk. And I think I read something recently too about we also have to consider that a lot of the coaches in the NBA are in the highest risk category for COVID-19.
Yeah.
So I think we think first and foremost, young healthy players, like it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but we're forgetting the support staffs that go behind that.
Sure.
So I think anything that they put together is going to be weighing those costs significantly. You know, the leadership of the NBA are very, very bright people. I mean, Adam Silver, he's not going to do something without carefully considering all aspects behind it. But I think any continuation, for sure, will require a quarantine area. We'll have no fans involved. We'll have just the minimum amount of
Yeah.
support staff included, and will require significant testing throughout. So that's a lot that needs to be set up just to even entertain the notion.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's interesting times in which we live. Something I just came across is you're doing a basketball clinic in this picture behind me, and I just wanted to know who are the biggest influences for you. I was told actually today from my coach. He just said find your voice when it comes to preaching, speaking. And I remember Coach Pratt. He always coached a little angry, very intense. I love him to death. But when did you find your own coaching voice?
That's a really good question. I, I think experience is the greatest teacher of all. So when I think about even maybe 6 or 7 years ago compared to where I'm at now would be significantly different. So I think it's always evolving. I think as coaches, that's important. That we continue to understand how to best reach our students. So in the world of athletics, our students are these athletes, but it's just like a teacher. If you have a teacher that's teaching the same lesson plan from 30 years ago, her students are going to be, or his students are going to be, head down asleep on a table. So I think that your methodology of teaching, how you present it, those things are constantly changing. I think what does get established is sort of your own comfort level with who you are, and how you want to present stuff, from a big picture standpoint. And like I said, honestly, I wouldn't say like until 5 or 6 years ago would I be able to really kind of clearly paint a picture of that. And that's the result of so many different things. I think having kids too is also a big part of that.
Yeah.
I mean, we learn a level of patience that didn't exist before that. So certainly the younger version of me was drastically different than where I'm at now.
And as I recall, you stand slightly under 6 feet. Do you have a story that you could share where maybe your center or power forward, you were in his face, then you realized he was like 6'10, 6'11, anything where it just hit you, wow, these guys are a lot bigger than my competition in high school?
Um, it's interesting. Like I probably should, I guess, be more cognizant of that. But I think part of you talk about your coaching voice. I mean, I think part of your coaching voice too is your confidence in coaching. So if I was constantly in my head like, oh my God, like these guys are so much bigger than me, so much better players than I ever was, then that's just a negativity that I don't want to have to deal with. So I really don't. And in some ways, I downplay it a lot. I mean, I will share one funny story. My sister actually is the one that would tell this story. But when I was in San Antonio, she came to visit, and the team was on the road. I had a bunch of work I had to do, so I just had her kind of hanging out. She did a workout and then went to shower, and came back and was like, what's going on with your bathroom? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, all the countertops are this high. And it's like, oh yeah, like, and then you realize like, oh wait a minute. But yeah, I mean, I really try. It's crazy, right? If you think about it,
Yeah.
you went to the Vermont, the Cabot, Vermont kid, under 6 foot kid, never played professionally kid. Like all these things are crazy if you take a step back and look at it like that. But for me, I think it's important that I don't, because it's just going to make me want to crawl in a hole and probably stop coaching.
Hey, I'll get you out in a couple questions, but first is with a 3-point shot. I think um, if they utilize a 3-point shot more in high school, I would go back and love to play again. But do you think it's hurt the game or it's really helped the game?
Oh man, honestly, I'm kind of with Pop. Pop's really anti 3-pointer, and so am I. I think the problem with the three, or especially with the analytics behind the three, is that in the U.S., especially, kind of everybody's playing the same way. So, when you watch an NBA game, spread, pick and roll with your best player having the ball in their hands and making decisions off of that, is the result of that 3-point line.
Sure.
And, coaches want to win and are always going to adapt to the rules in place. So I would love to see what the game would look like if you suddenly pulled the line. Now, the one great thing about it is it has kind of equalized the height and
Sure.
size advantages that existed prior to that. Obviously being big was really important, and now that's been mitigated. But I think there are a lot of interesting ideas to try to find this happy medium between the two. Ways that we can encourage team play, execution of offense, and not just relying on who can get the most 3-point attempts up in a game.
Well, I remember when Carmelo Anthony went to the New York Knicks, they said that he was a ball stopper. And then just watching this last dance with Jordan, and then they implemented the triangle system just to get the ball moving a little bit more. First question is the last dance, have you been able to watch? And if so, what are your thoughts?
So I'm probably the only basketball coach in the world who's not watched an episode yet. I have all of them recorded, and every night I'm like, oh, this is the night I'll do it, and then some sort of homeschool / parenting emergency takes that opportunity away. So I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, I grew up a huge Jordan fan, like everyone else. I've really followed Phil Jackson closely, read all his books, had a chance to pick his brain a little bit. Again, the Lakers were one of our affiliates. And I read the Jordan rules
Yeah.
growing up. So, see the footage behind it, I think will be great. But certainly, the stories that for some of the younger,
Right.
kids that they've never heard are familiar. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it takes you back. I'm certain you will enjoy it. But just thinking about Carmelo, I loved him that year at Syracuse. It was just so much fun to watch. Who is somebody in the NBA? And I will say, I did not love him for the Knicks. And just seeing that ball stopper um, mindset bothers me. James Harden is another player that personally I find it difficult to watch. But who are a couple players that you find difficult to watch or it'd be difficult to coach? And then who are some of your favorite players to watch in the NBA?
In the NBA. Well, I try. I think I try now much more so than in the past to really find the positives in all these guys. Like I
Sure.
think there's stuff that you can pull and learn from, and you have to understand. I watch a basketball game so differently than probably most people. So that's the curse of coaching is you can never just sit back and enjoy a basketball game again in your life. So there are aspects of Harden's game that drive me crazy. But I am also in awe of some of the things he can do offensively.
True.
And, I think we lose track of that. I mean, Russell Westbrook's another guy. So there are a lot of things he does that drive me crazy, but he plays so hard and at such a high tempo that you have to respect that. So, um, that's kind of how I look at all these guys. Players that I tend to gravitate towards and really like are, the ones that I feel are selfless, really put the team first and do a lot of the things that maybe don't jump out to a lot of other spectators. So just trying to think right now, some of my current favorite players. Oh boy. I really like Drew Holiday a lot.
Mm,
I think he's somebody that kind of does that
yeah,
in a lot of different ways. Um, I mean, of course, everybody loves Steph Curry because he's Steph Curry, right? Like,
right.
he's sort of makes you feel like you could do it. But Steph's not the best defender in the world. So there's sometimes watching him too gets me worked up. Man, honestly, it really is like each guy for each thing.
Yeah.
So, watching Draymond Green defensively, when he switches out, watching Klay Thompson, how he moves off the ball and how efficient he is without dribbles. Watching LeBron James and his ability to play multiple positions and create, and some of the passes he can make with his weak hand. So it's really about that. Less so like, hey, these are my favorite players overall.
Definitely. Will Voigt make some time. Two questions, then I'll get you out. The first question is, when you were a kid, or even now, people will say that guy is a bum in the NBA. He sits the bench. He's not real good. People honestly would say, Angola, where is that? Don't tell me they have any good players. Talking about the level of talent in the sport of basketball, can you compare it to anything else where a bum in the NBA was an all-star in college and was like all state in high school? How can you describe to young people the levels of basketball?
Yeah, I mean, I think you did a great job of illustrating that. At every level, every guy you're getting at some point was the best player on their team. And it's just like this battle of attrition, right? So the best high school players now, vie for college teams, right? And then the best college players now vie for professional teams. And then within the world of professional basketball, all these different levels. So the guy that was the best player, for the pro team in Belgium now might go to France and is suddenly just a middle of the road player. So it's this constant journey for these guys to continue to try to improve themselves again and again and again. And I think that's probably going back to what you were asking about this, the Vermont upbringing. That might be the one thing I think that is hard as a Vermont kid growing up to gain that perspective on things. There are city leagues in some places that are probably, in all honesty, more competitive than our state league. And a kid that comes out of that has I think a greater understanding of that than maybe somebody who hasn't been exposed to it. But at some point you're gonna hit that level, So if you're all state Vermont and now you go to college, it's gonna be a wake up call. I mean, I just remember my own experience. My first days of practicing at a collegiate setting and being like, whoa, like these guys are good. Just like realizing how much work I was gonna have to do just to stay competitive with them. So it really is. I mean, it's a constant uphill battle, and hopefully it gives you an appreciation when you look at NBA players. And that was kind of to my point earlier. Like, there might be a guy you don't like, but he's one of the 300 best people in the entire
Yeah.
planet on what he does. And that's pretty special. I mean, when you think of the millions and millions of people playing basketball in the world, and now you get a chance to look at a guy who's that good, it's a pretty special thing.
Well, maybe you kind of just answered it, but I just looked back from Cabot, Vermont to going to college in California, working with the Spurs and the NBA, the international play that you were a part of, are a part of, and then the championships with the Vermont Frost Thieves. If you could go back and talk to that sophomore in high school that I played against, what would you tell yourself about the important things in this life?
Ooh, wow. Enjoy the journey.
Hmm.
Uh, I think especially in our younger selves, right? Like, we get really caught up with, I got to be this, or I got to get here.
Yeah.
And we just sometimes need to just take a step back and enjoy where we're at. Um, you know, I think eventually I learned that lesson. It took me a long time. And I would never have guessed the places that this game would take me. But I think that's the biggest thing. I had just as much fun playing against Trinity Baptist or, playing in the odd as a senior as I have, playing in this, against the Lakers or
Sure.
playing whatever, in the Alamo Dome for the Spurs or whatever it is. So at the end of the day, it's all going to be relative. And we talked about that earlier. Like, I could tell you with amazing detail about most of the games I played in high school. So it's not like, I've seen thousands of NBA games and now all that other stuff wasn't meaningful. It is. It's just as meaningful, in some ways more meaningful. And I remember something that Pop told me. So again, Pop, was a Division III college basketball coach. And where I went to school, Pomona College, our rival is literally across the street. So Pomona is a part of this 5 college consortium that kids can go to classes at different schools, and so they intermingle quite a bit, but the athletic teams are separate.
Hmm.
And so when you play Claremont McKenna, that's the rival, you literally just walk across the street to do it. And I was talking to Pop about what was like winning the first championship, and he looked at me with absolute seriousness and said it was no different than playing CMC,
Well,
and he meant it. And he totally meant it. And I think that's something that we need to take with us. Like, people get hung up on the level way too much. I am fortunate. I've coached at the levels I've been at because I've been lucky, and I've worked hard with the opportunities that were given. But believe me, there are phenomenal coaches at every level, and in some ways, the youth coaches I'm jealous of because the impact that they have is going to be a lot greater than the impact I have as a pro coach. I mean, you talked about lessons from your coach. I have lessons from Coach Pratt. I have lessons from my youth coaches I still remember. So I think, too often it's about how do I become a college coach? How do I become a pro coach? How do I become an NBA coach? Instead of just really locking in on wherever you're at and appreciating, the opportunity we all have as coaches to hopefully have a positive impact on our players.
oh, definitely. Well, thank you so much for making the time. And it was great having you, great catching up. And we certainly wish you all the best in your future success.
No, I appreciate it, Jeff. And man, I don't think you've aged since I played against you in those Trinity Cabot days.
Hey, I have some good genes, I guess. Who knows? But again, you've been listening to Jay Fuller Interviews, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we hope to bring you more great interviews. But Will Voigt, one of the best and one of Vermont's own. We'll talk to you soon. With that, we're out.